What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the sort of beginner Sorc build, and this is a heavy attack build specifically. So this is kind of a little bit less advanced than the typical Sorc heavy attack build that I normally put up. This is kind of geared more towards beginner people, who kind of don't have access to certain DLCs. They might not be ESL Plus members, for example, who want to start to get into vet trials, the base game vet trials, so things like vet Kraglearn trials. So if you're looking for a more advanced heavy attack build, then stay tuned. I will be releasing one of those later on down the line. This particular build is built for beginners who only have access to the base game things, who just kind of want to start dipping their toes into vet trials without necessarily breaking the bank, having to buy new DLCs or expansions in order to get the best of the best gear. So we're going to basically make use of the tools that are available to us in just the base game in order to basically maximize our overall DPS. Now, like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, basically everything you need to know to basically create this build yourself. Now, for this particular build, there's not that many set replacements out there, mainly because we're very limited because we're just taking a look at just base game stuff. So we're only really limited to what we're able to get from just base game dungeons, maybe crafted sets, things you can buy off Guild Trader. So not many alternatives out there, but I will point out one or two sets that you might want to pick up in place of some of the sets that I have here. Then, of course, we'll do a 21 million raid dummy parse so you guys can get an idea of the amount of DPS you can expect this build to pull in an optimized raid environment. Now, I know that this video is kind of based around beginner trials people who just kind of want to start getting into vet trials, and of course this particular parse is going to be a little bit higher than what you guys might be able to pull, the sort of beginner level of DPS, mainly because the raid dummy gives us a very idealized scenario. It gives us 100% uptime on pretty much all the debuffs and buffs that you can expect to see in an organized raid. So take that with a grain of salt, and I'll repeat this again when we go over the parse, that this particular parse is going to be very, very optimistic. It's probably not realistic to expect this kind of parse in an actual raid scenario. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started here first with our gear. So like I mentioned, we're limiting ourselves to base game stuff. So that's either things you can buy off of Guild Traders or things you can farm yourself. So we're limited to basically base game dungeons, overland sets, and crafted sets. So in that regard, there are one or two monster helm sets that actually are pretty decent to use in this sort of limitations. So obviously we're going with Ilambris. So Ilambris is a very powerful set, still a very, I should say, it's still a very strong set. A lot of people don't seem to give Ilambris that much credit anymore because we've kind of moved on to Zon and 2-piece crit, but Ilambris is actually a pretty nice Marsh Helm set to run here. So whenever you deal flame or shock damage, you have a 10% chance to summon a meteor shower of that damage type, which deals a certain amount of damage to all enemies within 4 meters every second for 5 seconds. Each effect can occur once every 8 seconds. Note that it says each effect, so you can actually get both the flame and the shock damage to proc at the same time. And if you can't kind of basically just double the damage, it ends up being about 3,000 damage every second for 5 seconds every 8 seconds, if you're able to proc them basically on cooldown, which in this instance might be pretty easy to do. As a Sorc, we're doing a heavy attack build, so we have plenty of shock damage from liquid, in this case lightning flood, as well as our heavy attack, and then we're also getting some flame damage out because we are using a fire staff on the back bar. So we have Blockade of Fire, and we also have a fire glyph as well to help proc that flame damage enchant. So Ilambris is a really strong set to use here because we're able to proc both damage procs reliably, and in addition, it does allow us to play at range, so we don't have to be limited to playing within this melee range that you normally see with sort of endgame builds where you have to run Zon. Now, the one weakness of Ilambris is in a more mobile fight, bosses can move out of the proc. So the proc pretty much stays in place whenever enemy happens to proc on. So if a boss happens to move out of that 4-meter radius, which is a pretty small radius, you will basically not get any damage out of Ilambris. So that's kind of the risk you take when you're running Ilambris. The other monster helm set is going to be Grothdarr. This comes from Vaults of Madness, Ilambris comes from Crypt of Hearts 1. Both dungeons are very easy dungeons to complete here. So Grothdarr is actually a little bit stronger than Ilambris, but it does require you to be within melee range. So when you deal damage, you have a chance to create lava pools to swirl around you, dealing 24-30 flame damage to all enemies within 8 meters of you every second for 5 seconds. This effect can occur every 10 seconds. Now in terms of just raw damage, Grothdarr is actually pretty much going to beat out Ilambris as long as you're within melee range, and you can actually get Grothdarr to proc. So that's kind of a limitation of Grothdarr. You have to be within that 8-meter radius from the boss. Not all bosses you'll be able to stack up on. So for example, if you're doing something like Ethereal Archive, the first boss there, the Storm Atronach, yes, it is a stack and burn fight, but there is a mechanic where you have to run away from the boss. In that instance, if Grothdarr happens to proc and you're running towards this sort of safe zone, you basically wasted that proc essentially, versus Ilambris, where you'll actually be able to continue to damage it with your monster helm proc that way. So just a couple of things to consider here. Now of course you can also go with two one-piece spell crit sets. So in this regard, it'd be something like one-piece Zahn, which you can still get even if you don't have access to the helm because you don't have DLCs. You can still get the shoulder piece, so you can get the shoulder piece which adds additional spell crit. And then you can run something like Slimecraw or Iceheart, both of which are base game sets. Slimecraw comes from Wayward Sewers 1, and Iceheart comes from Direfrost Keep. Both of those sets have additional one-piece spell crits, so just keep that in mind. You can still run two one-piece spell crits, mainly because the Shadow is very strong right now. Now, I do want to also mention Slimecraw here. Let me just see if I can find it here. I don't think I popped it out. So Slimecraw is a set that you might want to consider picking up as a DPS, particularly in sort of this build, this sort of beginner trials guilds, where you might not necessarily be able to get very good combat prayer uptime from your healers, whether that's because you guys are learning this stuff, or your healers are kind of focusing in more on learning how to heal and kind of learning mechanics rather than focusing on maximizing deep buff uptimes. So Slimecraw is a pretty easy dungeon to get, so Wayward Sewers 1, and you gain Minor Berserk at all times. So if you are not able to get consistent combat prayer uptime, then Slimecraw is a really strong monster helm set. Minor Berserk is a really strong buff that you basically want to have at all times. So being able to just put on a monster helm set and reliably get Minor Berserk is a very strong thing to get on him. So those are kind of your different options for monster helm sets. So you have Ilambris, Slimecraw, Grothdarr, and then two one-piece spell crit sets. Now in terms of body set, we're going with Julianos. This is a crafted set from Grothdarr. Now obviously we're assuming that you can't craft it yourself, so you will have to, buy it from a guild trader, or you can gather up the materials yourself and give them to somebody else to craft it for you. A lot of trading guilds and a lot of social guilds will be more than happy to make this set for you as long as you're able to provide either the gold to purchase the materials or the materials themselves. So really nice set to have on hand here, and you will want to have this on the body because it does actually doesn't really matter where you have it, because we're not having the Maelstrom staff at all. The second set is going to be Mother's Sorrow. This is a base game set from Deshawn, so it's a light armor set. You can buy it off guild traders, you can farm it yourself here. Now of course in a base game you're assuming that you don't have access to jewelry crafting, so the gold jewelry that you see here might not necessarily be realistic for you to get. You can still get the gold jewelry because it is an overland set, so you can buy it off of a guild trader because it does pop up from time to time on the golden trader in Cyrodiil. So you can still get gold jewelry, but it's going to be a lot more difficult for you to obtain because you don't have access to jewelry crafting. Now, as I mentioned earlier, mentioned a lot of times now, we're assuming we only have access to base game stuff. So we don't have access to jewelry crafting, which in turn means we don't have access to transmutation of jewelry into other traits. So we're sticking with Arcane here. That's pretty much the only trait that we can use here. That's kind of why I mentioned that we were pretty much limited to only light armor sets, because medium armor sets, heavy armor sets, they come in robust and heavy, and so can't really use that jewelry because it's not going to be beneficial to our overall DPS. Then for our weapons, the front bar is going to be a lightning staff infused with a flame damage enchant. We're going infused instead of precise because our DPS is going to be significantly lower, and so precise is not going to end up beating out infused here. On the back bar, we have a Inferno staff infused with a shock damage enchant. We still want to have that shock damage enchant there because we do want to basically maximize our chances of proccing Ilambris. So we're going with the shock on the back and flame on the front. Doesn't really matter where you put them, kind of is up to you where you want to put them. You pretty much will have Blockade up on cooldown, so you'll always be able to proc that back bar enchant here. Now, the other set that I found to be pretty close to this particular setup is going to be Necropotence. So Necropotence is a base game set from Rivenspire. So this is something you can farm or you can buy off of guild traders. Pretty cheap, and it's actually really nice. So when you have a pet active, your max magicka is increased by 3150. Now for this particular build, we are using the pet. We are using either the Twilight Tormentor or the Twilight Matriarch. I like the Matriarch for the heal, but Tormentor does provide a little bit of additional DPS. So Necropotence is pretty strong. Now the downside of Necropotence is because we're using the Shadow Mundus, spell crit ends up being just a little bit stronger, a little bit more useful overall. But Necropotence is a pretty nice set to hold on to kind of... What I tried out the Parses here, it actually ended up being very close. Julianos was a little bit stronger, so that's why we're ending up using Julianos. Also a little bit easier to get because you can usually be able to farm the materials yourself once you hit CP 160 and use them to basically get somebody to craft the set for you. But beyond that, the only other set that I want to mention is going to be Infallible Aether. Which is a base game set from one of the new trials. So the thing with Infallible Aether is it's actually pretty nice in terms of base game sets, but if you want to get into harder content, so for vet trials for example, Infallible Aether ends up losing a lot of power here. The 5-piece is not particularly strong because it only adds 903 damage to each tick for your heavy attack. Not really all that impressive. The other thing too is on a dummy it might seem very strong, and that's because it's afflicting minor vulnerability with your heavy attacks. If you control for minor vulnerability, then Julianos and Necropotence actually do end up performing pretty decently well compared to Infallible Mage. You still get that minor Slayer bonus from the 3-piece there, but the 5-piece is generally speaking not going to be all that useful. And that's mainly because when you start getting into vet trials, especially once you get out of the Craglorn trials, healers are the ones that are going to be using Infallible Mage, and if you're going to do something like Craglorn hard mode trials, at that caliber, healers should be running Infallible Aether for that minor vulnerability uptime. In addition, you are using a shock damage enchant, which also provides minor vulnerability uptime, so Infallible Mage is basically on par with, if not a little bit stronger than, Julianos and Necropotence, but it's not really something that I would recommend you go out and farm if eventually you do want to kind of quote-unquote graduate to harder content. You want to maybe go into VMAW, maybe go into halls, and buy some of the DLCs and expansions and kind of explore the harder side of ESO. It's not a set that I would necessarily recommend you farm for as a DPS, because as you get to those higher levels, the healers are going to be the one wearing it, and so it's kind of redundant to wear an Infallible Mage, and the 5-piece is not particularly strong there. So you can definitely get this if you would like. It's pretty easy to farm the Craglorns on normal to get the set here, but again, it's not something that you're going to see DPS really use in very end game as you start to get further and further into the end game content here. Now, in terms of my character sheet, I am a Dark Elf. The other racial option is going to be the High Elves. You can also go with the Bretons if you would like, if you want to kind of get some additional sustain. All 3 of those are very strong options here. Now, if you intend on sticking with the heavy attack rotation, then Dark Elves or High Elves are going to be the best option here, because you don't really need a sustain from a Breton if you intend on sticking with the heavy attack rotation. All of our points are going into Magicka because we are using Bystat Food, which gives us max health, max Magicka, and we also have some additional health from the passive under the Daedric summoning line whenever we have our pet out. So no need to put any points into health here. You can see with the pet out and with Bystat Food, we're sitting at almost 20k health, which is pretty nice. And in trials, this is only going to go up because you're going to get minor toughness from a Warden healer and Ebon from one of your tanks. Wonderstone, going with the Shadow. And then we are a vampire. You don't have to be a vampire if you don't want to. Again, this is a heavy attack build, so you don't need additional regen. But if you want to eventually do a light attack build, I would recommend taking a look at Vampirism for the 10% additional Magicka regen, because Sorks, generally speaking, have one of the worst sustain out of all Magicka DPS specs. Then we are running Bystat Food. The strongest Bystat Food in the game right now is Double-Blooded Mara. So this gives you the max amount of max Magicka and max health. If you don't have access to Double-Bladed Mara, which is actually fairly cheap to make and pretty easy to get the recipe for, because it did come from the Halloween event, I believe there has been 3 of them so far, so the recipes are pretty common nowadays, and the ingredients are also not particularly rare either, so pretty easy to get this. But if you can't get Double-Bladed Mara, then you can use the base blue food, which is a little bit weaker than Double-Bladed Mara, but still viable for this particular build. For our skill bars, not much flexibility here. On our front bar, we have Endless Fury, Twilight Matriarch. We can also go to the Tormentor if you'd like. Bound Aegis, Empowered Ward, so we still have our shield. Inner Light, Shooting Star. Back bar, Lightning Flood, Blockade of Fire, Daedric Prey, Rearming Trap, Twilight Matriarch, and Greater Storm Atronach. So again, we're assuming that we don't have access to any of the expanded, Sigic Order skill lines, so we're just sticking with base game stuff here. Now, if you don't want to farm for Major Skill 10, you don't have to be running Shooting Star. You can double bar the Storm Atronach. That's perfectly fine to do that. Now going over to our CP points, CP cap is still 810, so this is assuming that we are at max CP, so you can adjust these accordingly depending on how much CP you actually have. 100 Arcanist, 75 Tenacity. This isn't really all that necessary. This is more kind of in preparation for if you eventually want to do a light attack build. 33 Shadow Ward, 31 Tumbling, and 31 Warlord. You can split them however you'd like. For blue CPs. Again, this is assuming that you have a maximum debuff uptime. So obviously in a sort of beginner progression guild, you know, who's just starting to get into Vet Craglorns, it's not realistic to expect full debuff uptimes, especially from things like Alkosh and Torok's Infused Crusher, which does require quite a bit of experience on the tank's part. So you will need to shift some CP points around, depending on your specific build. 66 Elfborn, 64 Ellie Expert, 11 Spell Erosion, 11 Staff Expert, 66 Master at Arms, and 52 into Thaumaturge. Now, if you do need to put some more points into Spell Erosion, you can drop Ellie Expert down to either 56 or 49, Elfborn down to 61 or 56. I wouldn't really touch Master at Arms or Staff Expert if you can, because you do want that Butcher passive here under the Atronach skill line. If you need to, though, you can drop Master at Arms down to 61 or 56, Staff Expert can be dropped down to 9. Then Thaumaturge can be dropped down to 48 or 44. You'd still need to make up penetration even after those reductions. You can always run the Lover rather than the Shadow Mundus instead. Finally, our red CPs. This is going to be a general approach to mitigation. It's not necessarily going to maximize mitigation across a single trial or anything like that, so just keep that in mind. You will need to shift red CP points around in order to maximize any sort of mitigation. 81 Ironclad, 61 Thick-Skinned, and 64 into both Hardy and Elemental Defender. Alright, that's pretty much all the build information. Pretty short, pretty simple compared to our meta builds because, again, we're assuming we only have access to base game sets here. The rotation itself is actually pretty simple, as you can imagine from heavy attack builds. Not much to really talk about here, so we're going to just really quickly demonstrate it on the 6 million here, and then we'll move on to the 20 million dummy parse. So basically, you just lay down all your back bar stuff, so 1, 2, 3, 4, then you go to your front bar, heavy attack twice. There will be instances where you will have the heavy attack once, and that's if you need to reapply all 4 dots, as well as use the Storm Atronach ultimate on your back bar. So this is an example of the rotation itself. So basically, you do Flood, Blockade, Pray, Trap, and then you do 2 heavy attacks. Next time you're on your back bar, you do not need to re-up Trap because it does basically go over again. Go your front bar again, just do 2 heavy attacks, and then repeat. The 1, 2, 3, 4 back bar, 2 heavy attacks, and then you do 1, 2, 3, and then 2 heavy attacks again. Now when you get into executes, you can continue to do this rotation if you'd like, but if you want to sort of maximize your DPS, you would basically, instead of 2 heavy attacks, you would do 3 to 5 Endless Furies. So if you use 4 abilities on the back bar, you do 4 Endless Furies. If you use 3, you would use 5 Endless Furies. 4, 5, then you would re-up all your back bar dots. Now, of course, this does mean you kind of have to light weave through Endless Fury, so if you don't want to do that, you're not comfortable doing that, you can still keep on doing your heavy attacks. You're not going to be seeing that big of a loss if you're not going to be using Endless Fury at all. So it's up to you whether you want to do that or not. It is also much bigger drain on your max Magicka, so just keep that in mind. If you do decide to go with the Endless Fury spam, it is going to eat into your Magicka quite a bit. You don't have as much sustain because obviously you're not heavy attacking. So one thing you could do is you can do 1 thing of Endless Fury, and then on the next time you're on your front bar, you can do 2 heavy attacks instead. So a few options there when it comes to your rotation. We are going to stick with using Endless Fury and Execute, and that's going to be 20% health or lower. So again, this is the 21 million dummy, which gives us all the raid buffs with 100% uptime. This is pretty much very unrealistic and actually impossible because you can't get 100% uptime Major Force no matter what unless you're running like 6 support roles. So going to be a little bit inflated here, especially when you compare it to like a beginner Trials guild, which is not going to have perfect uptimes, but this should give you an idea of the amount of DPS that you can pull if you were to bring this into a more organized Vet Trials group, or as your Vet Trials group get more organized and you get better buff uptimes. So let's go ahead and get started here. First, I like to start off with the Rearming Trap. and then I'll try to talk through the rotation as we go through it. This parse is going to be a little bit long, mainly because our DPS is not going to be quite as high as the meta build, so just bear with me. I will also show you a parse using Necropotence so you guys can compare between Julianos and Necropotence. And we are using spell power potions. Spell power potions, I understand, can be a little bit financially expensive for some players. So if you don't want to run spell power potions, then you can actually replace Endless Fury with getting Power Surge, I believe is the one if you want, the one that gives major sorcery. So you can use that as your source of major sorcery, and it also gives you a nice heal whenever you critically hit. So I'm sure people are going to ask me why I decided to go with Julianos rather than Necropotence when Necropotence boosts our pet damage, and we are using a pet. And that's really because the pet only makes up, and you'll see this in the Parses in the combat metrics report at the end, the pet actually, while it is strong, it does not make up a large portion of our DPS. A combination of a lot of other abilities actually end up making a significant large portion of our DPS. As you can imagine, it's only one ability compared to the rest of our abilities. And so yes, Necropotence Max Magicka does improve all abilities across the board, and it also improves the pet. However, Julianos provides additional spell crit, and that's going to be really important because we are running the Shadow Mundus. So the Shadow Mundus adds additional crit damage. So what we want to do is we want to basically get higher crit chance. That's why we're using something like Mother's Sorrow and Julianos. It gives us 2 spell crit bonuses on the Julianos. So that ends up giving us a little bit more DPS and does make up for the loss of the Max Magicka bonus, I should say damage bonus to our Matriarch. In addition, 299 spell damage is actually a little bit stronger than Negropotence's 5-piece. Because remember, 10.5 Max Magicka is approximately equal to 1 spell damage, so if you divide 3,150 by 10.5, you actually get a little bit less than 300's effective spell damage. Julianos, the 5-piece, is actually pretty comparable to that of Necropotence's 5-piece. And then Spell Crit, because we are running the Shadow Mundus, is actually going to be a little bit stronger than the Max Magicka bonuses that Necropotence provides for us. So that's why Julianos actually ends up being about as strong as, if not a little bit stronger than, Necropotence. Now, of course, I've already mentioned that Infallible Aether will actually end up out-parsing Necropotence and Julianos on a dummy. However, I cannot, in good conscience, recommend farming for that set, namely because, again, as you get more and more into vet trials and as your team gets more experience, your heroes are going to be the ones that are going to be wearing Infallible Aether, and so it ends up being a little bit wasted on you, because the reason why Infallible Aether is actually so strong on things like 6 million dummies or 3 million dummies is because it provides minor vulnerability, pretty much 100% uptime. So if you want to compare something like Infallible Aether to Julianos or Necropotence, you do have to take into consideration the minor vulnerability uptime is going to skew the Infallible Aether parse upward. So as you can see here, pretty simple rotation. Not too much to really talk about here. So we aren't taking the combustion synergy, so that'd be the orbs or the shards, because we are a heavy attack build, so there's no reason for us to take that synergy and take it away from somebody else. You can, of course, use it if you would like. That way, somebody else can potentially grab it, especially on the shards, because it only shows up for 3 people. But I recommend just sort of leaving it there. You don't really need to grab it at all. Getting close to execute here, so remember the Sorc execute range is 20% health remaining rather than 25 on like a Magicka Nightblade. So at this point here, it's pretty much drop backbar dots, and here we are going to start using the orb synergies because we do need additional sustain. We use 3 on our back bar, so we use 5 on our front bar. And now we use 4 on our back bar, so we do 4 on our front bar. So here we use 5 on our back bar here, because we are using the Atrial Ultimate on our back bar, so we do 3 on the front bar. Alright, so there we go, that is our parse. We pulled 62.85k, 62,855. So you can see here the Matriarch is going to be the strongest ability in terms of just raw DPS, doing about 15.3% of our DPS. Now if we go ahead and take a look at a couple other parses that I did, this is the Necropotence parse that I did, 63,065. This parse here is a Julianos parse, another Julianos parse, 63,120. So if we take a look at our average hits, comparing these two parses here, so the Necropotence compared to the Julianos parse, you'll see, looking at the Matriarch here, 23,209 is our average compared to 25,043. Lightning Flood did 9,775, and Lightning Flood here did 9,761. Blockade of Fire 7,126, compared to 7,270. So you can see here that both Necropotence and Julianos, there's not that big of a difference here, and the real difference comes from the spell crit chance that we have here. So see, with Necropotence we have 61.4, compared to Julianos where we're sitting at 69, as well as having higher spell damage. So our average hits actually aren't changing all too much when you compare it to Necropotence and Julianos. There is obviously some crit RNG involved here. So for example, we want to get 64% crit on our Atronach, which gives us a max of 24,261. Versus here, the Atronach had 72, so our average is a little bit higher as a result of that. So just something to keep in mind here. So you can see here that both Julianos and Necropotence are both pretty decent sets, so you can pick whichever one you want to go for, and go for that set here. I personally recommend Julianos, just because if you do want to shift to a non-pet build for whatever reason, Julianos will serve you better than Necropotence, obviously. Necropotence does have that limitation that it has to be a pet active to get that max Magicka bonus. So it's kind of up to you which set you want to pick out. So that is going to be it for this build video. Let me know down in the comment section below if you guys have any questions for me. Again, hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.